My name's Norm Cummings. I'm a member of the board of the Milford Historical Society and Museum, and I'm here today with Azuwuike Ndukwu, a very good friend of mine since his youth and my sort of youth in the Milford back in the 1970s. We're doing oral histories on what it was like for young people to grow up in a mostly white community as a young black person, and he's kindly agreed to share his time and his memories of his experiences in the Milford. Welcome back to town, Oz.
Thanks for helping me get back here.
Oz was born in Nigeria. He's the third of 5 siblings in the Ndukwu family. He was known as Henry when he was living here, when he was in school, and that for many people who might be viewing this, that might be the name you remember him by. His birth name was Azuwuike, and he and his family moved to Michigan in 1969 when he was 10 years old, and then moved to New Milford in 1972 when he was 12 or 13, and went to middle school here. And I remember him first as a soccer sensation at Scattercook Middle School, and then he became a star track athlete and soccer player in the Milford High School and distinguished himself as a student at New Milford. After his years here, he was a dual major at Michigan State University, where your father had been a teacher.
Yeah.
Before that, when they were in Michigan, and he was a dual major in business and international relations, the latter earned through an honors program within Michigan State. He then attended UConn Law School and added a master's degree in business administration from the University of Chicago. Oz then began a distinguished career in corporate law, specializing in mergers and acquisition. He spent 22 years with United Technologies Corporation. He served as the Vice President of Legal Affairs and Strategy for the Latin American region, and he was based in Miami, and which you now have a home. You're back to one of your roots.
Yes.
And for the Asia Pacific region, when he was based in Singapore. His next role was as the head of legal strategy for the Carrier Corporation, after which he retired. And I don't remember which year that was, but that was his first retirement. He returned to serve as Senior Vice President and General Counsel for Algeco Scotsman?
Algeco Scotsman.
Okay, Algeco Scotsman. And then he retired again before accepting a seat on the board of Baltimore Life, which he's currently on. And he's also working on various projects in his native Nigeria. And by the way, both he and Felicia are going to be traveling to Africa soon to visit their mom.
Sunday.
A few days from now, to move to visit their mom, who's been living there in recent years. Oz's dad passed away years ago, and the two of them are the only 2 of the 5 siblings still alive. They're going to be traveling there to spend some time with their mom, and he's been working on various projects to help out Nigerians. Along the way, he married Crystal, and they have now shared more than 31 years of marriage, and are proud parents to 2 grown sons, Azuwuike and Ikechi. Sorry. And so let's get started. Understanding your first several years in Michigan were spent in Michigan when you came to the States, how might your early childhood in Nigeria and your initial language barrier have affected how you perceived New Milford and your fellow students and friends while you were growing up here? I don't know if that makes sense, but...
It does. I think it had a tremendous impact. And to fully appreciate the level of the impact, I think you would have to kind of rewind 3 years before we came to New Milford. Because initially, we moved to East Lansing, Michigan, and
where Michigan State is.
Where Michigan State is. In fact, I went to Spartan Village Elementary School.
Okay.
But what was interesting, before we arrived in East Lansing, was the circumstances under which we got there. We had just literally came out of the Biafran Civil War.
Oh wow, I forgot about the timing of that.
And we came as refugees. My parents were already in the U.S. studying before the Civil War broke out in Nigeria. And so when we arrived in the U.S., we got out as refugees, and we landed in Lisbon, Portugal. And it was funny because I was watching the scenes yesterday of what was going on in Afghanistan. It reminded me exactly of our situation because we left our country in a cargo plane, no seats.
Amazing.
No passport, without our parents.
So this should have been Felicia,
Maurice, myself, and none of us
young
spoke
children.
English.
Wow.
We didn't have a parent or a guardian. Our grandmother, there was a lady, somehow we were told to be at an airport that was ferrying out government papers. And our grandmother, we walked there. It took days of walking. And we were all suffering from malnutrition at the time. In fact, when we arrived in East Lansing, I had not started school at all and didn't speak a word of English. I didn't know the alphabets in any language because I'd never stepped foot in the classroom prior to that.
You were already like 9 or 10 years, 10 years old. Wow.
Yeah. And the biggest challenge was what grade to start us at. Because during that Civil War, all the schools were closed. Felicia wasn't attended school, Maurice hadn't attended school. So we were beyond the language challenges. We also had tremendous academic challenges because I couldn't even tell time. I didn't know the days of the week because we lived in a rural village where none of those things mattered. It was, so we came out of a situation where, you probably have seen on TV and some of the news reports, kids standing in Red Cross milk lines. That was us. We stood in Red Cross milk lines and before getting out of the country. We managed to land in Lisbon, Portugal, and it took our parents some months to even know that we had gotten out of the country. And the government was kind enough in Portugal to, put us up in a hotel with some other refugees. And eventually they all left one by one because, they had found where they were going or their relatives had come. And it took our parents a while to even be notified that we had gotten out of the country.
They were in Michigan.
And they were in Michigan. So my dad had to find his way to Portugal to come get us. And we didn't even recognize our dad. I didn't recognize him the first time I saw him because we hadn't seen him since I was maybe 3 years old. So when we came to East Lansing, Michigan, we had, several challenges to overcome. And so by the time we arrived in New Milford 3 years later, we had, I think, managed to at least learn enough of the language, to enroll in schools here. And one of the challenges was that, unlike East Lansing, Michigan, East Lansing was accustomed to having students from various countries that were kids of students enrolled at Michigan State.
Right.
So they had programs to move kids through learning the language and assimilating.
So it was a good landing spot for
It
you.
was the perfect landing place. And by luck, we were fortunate that we were able to at least stay 3 years there and get some of that foundation. Obviously, when we came to New Milford, the foundation was not here. New Milford High School or New Milford Elementary Schools, there weren't many kids that didn't speak English.
Right.
At this, where I was going, Pettibone, everybody pretty much knew how to speak English and didn't have some of the challenges that I perhaps had. So in addition to, the various issues, taking place around the country, I would say that, we were oblivious to all that because we had bigger challenges like learning how to speak English.
Day-to-day experiences were challenging.
Yeah.
Is is it, in retrospect, how much of a difference do you think New Milford made as opposed to being, if you had moved to Danbury, if you'd moved to, to, I don't know, anywhere else, New Jersey or something like that, was New Milford, if you'd moved to an even smaller town or whatever, how would you compare what you know of New Milford from your years here and what your life was like in New Milford at that point? I would think it was probably, you were fortunate to have landed here rather than a lot of other places, but how would you phrase that?
Well, obviously we landed here, and I don't have that comparison.
Right.
But I would say that New Milford, because it did not have perhaps some of the other challenges that places like Danbury were going through at the time, probably was an ideal place for us to have landed. The schools were very welcoming, I found. Till this day, I consider New Milford to be my hometown.
That's nice.
And when people ask me where I grew up, it's always New Milford. And so it's always a special place, I believe, in my family's heart that, this is what we consider to be our hometown. Is by far where we've spent the most time. And the fondest memories going through the schools and New Milford provided an opportunity to focus on the things that we needed, remedial things that we needed, as opposed to other things that could have been a distraction or riots and things. None of that was taking place in New Milford.
So the question that I could ask you about, where were you of civil rights, things going on in the world and everything like that, going back to what you said a couple minutes ago, it wasn't even a concern of yours. You weren't as aware of what was going on because you weren't experiencing it in New Milford.
Correct, and it wasn't really, as far as I was concerned, I was totally oblivious to all that stuff, and I didn't even know what it was about. I mean, there were other cultural things that we were learning at the same time, and yes, to me it was sort of like background noise. I mean, for me, the day-to-day challenges of, learning the English language and, learning how to read and write and all those type of, fundamentals were really more of a priority. And plus, not knowing the culture and understanding what the issues were about. Yes, I mean, to me, the extent of it was hearing about it in the news. And, you listen to things at different levels, depending on your experience and your knowledge. And my knowledge was fairly, low in terms of understanding what was really going on.
Having had an older sister and an older brother go through the years in New Milford High School before you, kind of, I won't say it smoothed the path, you had to create your own path, but both of them had already established themselves as being good students, outstanding athletes, and well-liked and well-perceived in the town, and I think they probably had good perceptions of the town too. How was your experience, were there differences in your experience in that regard compared to them? Because your brother John was like 6 years younger, and by the time he came around, the world had changed a lot of ways for him and as compared to for you. But how would you compare just in the few years between Felicia and you, and how, and in fact, she was a girl coming into town, going to the high school, and as a guy, what was it like for you?
I would say I probably had it easier because I had come to this country younger, so I had more time to catch up than they did, and before they were out in the world. So I think it was much easier for me by far than for Felicia. Started coming here at 10 as opposed to 13. I think those 3 years were important years that helped me that she didn't have. So I would say being in New Milford and watching how they progressed and frankly, as we were going through it, we weren't, thinking this is a challenge or we gotta do this, blah, blah. We were just going through life normally like anybody else with day-to-day challenges. We weren't thinking about, obstacles and things like that. So New Milford made it possible to go through life like that, where you weren't thinking about, oh, you're black, or this obstacle on the way, or is this an issue? In a way, I would say if that was going on, we were somewhat oblivious to, at least I was oblivious to it. And I think that was probably a good thing, because it allowed you to not to dwell on the negatives, and it allowed you to kind of, focus on the things that were important.
What you learned and experienced.
And positive.
Who were your, not by name, you can certainly name names if you want, but in your social sphere, was it based on your, as it is for especially a lot of guys in high school, their friends tend to be their fellow athletes.
Yeah.
But I know you became, you were talking about what a low standard you had initially because you hadn't learned the language. You showed yourself to be an outstanding student. Obviously, you went to good schools after that. You must have accomplished a lot academically as you got through. Who were your friends? Did you hang around with other black kids more than whites, or was it just a blend?
At New Milford High, I don't think New Milford, first of all, there weren't that many black students.
Right.
There was only like maybe a handful
Right.
in the whole high school when I was going there. And so I think for me, because I was so involved in sports, while I was going through, I just wanted to just absorb as much as knowledge and everything. I wanted to experience as much as I could and everything, whether it was, I was on the marching band, I was on the jazz band, and I played sports. I just embraced everything that New Milford High had to offer, and I tried to get as much out of it as I could. And as a result of that, I would say my social circle was quite diverse in that I had friends that were from band, I had friends that were from soccer, I had friends from track, and most of all, probably as important for me, I had friends from our neighborhood because
back in the days when neighborhoods
made a difference.
Created friends,
and I remember growing up in New Milford in our neighborhood, and I was fortunate enough that there were a few boys my age, and what we would do is after school, even after sports, we would go to Harrybrook Park. During baseball season, we made a field there. We would all get together to go there. There was a great family in New Milford, the Mullane, that had a basketball hoop that we would all go to.
His dad just turned 80. He's a good friend of mine. He just turned 80, by the way.
Oh, really?
I'll pass along your regards.
Well, I tried to call him last night. So we would go to their house and play basketball in their driveway until they said, guys, you have to go home, and the kids have to go to bed. Then we would all break up. And then in the wintertime, we would end up at Harrybrook Park. We would sweep the pond and play hockey in the wintertime. And so for me, growing up in New Milford, it was very easy to work through different social groups. And I'm not sure it would have been as easy at a bigger school.
I think that's probably fair.
Mm-hmm.
How did, in school, at Schaghticoke or New Milford High School, you would have had a year of American history in New Milford High School. Did you were you taught anything about Black history in the United States other than the fact that we had slavery right up into the 1800s here and certainly in the South till the 1860s? And then in the Underground Railroad and its role and whatever in the North especially, did you learn anything else about Black history in the Milford schools?
I don't recall that being taught.
Yeah, I don't think it probably was.
Yeah, I don't recall that being taught.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
Yeah.
point were you, was it before you were out of high school? When you were in high school, did you become aware of the names Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis? Probably not so much John Lewis. I don't think he became famous until later years, except maybe within the civil rights movement. Were you aware of those names before you left New Milford?
I was aware of those names before I left New Milford, but I don't think it was because of New Milford High School, because at that time, I don't think there were any curriculums.
I mean, your dad was a teacher who taught about things like that,
Right.
So he probably would have been passing along over family dinner or whatever.
Yeah, that's where I probably would have gotten that from.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Yeah.
Through your perspectives of years since leaving New Milford, during the many years of your career, which is amazing, how did growing up in New Milford hinder or help your growth as an adult professionally? I mean, you have I read the resume, it's very impressive. When you've been dealing with different corporate deals and things like that over the years, was growing up in New Milford part of the success you've had, which obviously you've had success getting to high levels of corporate law in different entities? I don't think you probably learned much law in Milford High School or anywhere else, but how much did your growing up here in a safe, kind of nurturing environment would have helped or limited you in that way?
No, I think it was tremendous help. And because one of the things that I think I got out of New Milford that I'm very fond of is the town allowed you, at least allowed me, to excel and see the benefits of hard work, whether it was academically or in sports. And I think it's important when you see that you can translate hard work to results. And also, I think from a racial perspective, I think one way that it was useful growing up in New Milford was that in New Milford, yes, they certainly were people that had issues with color.
Still do, sadly.
Yes. And you kind of learn how to navigate around them and recognizing that, yeah, they have issues, but you still have to work with them. And and I think corporate world is the same way, in that, yes, there are people that, you may not see eye to eye and for one reason or another, but you still have to work with them to accomplish whatever objective, whether it's, a transaction, you have to get along with them to accomplish the objective. And I think having grown up in New Milford and having to navigate several situations like that in New Milford kind of prepared you for the real world, because in the real world, you have to deal with a lot of people that, may not like you for whatever reason, or like your perspective, or and so on. And I think New Milford helped me see that very clearly, that yes, you can, move forward beyond certain specific issues with individuals that are personal.
So almost in a microcosmic way, in New Milford, you learned with less hurdles, but each one instructed you and made you wiser.
Yes, stronger.
And for a person who grew up with the limitations, or not limitations, with the absence of any kind of education, to be able to go on from New Milford and what you got here, and then to go on, obviously, to really good schools for your later degrees, but then to go into a world where I would think in the 1980s, you faced probably more challenges than you're maybe saying right now, to rise up to the level that you did.
Yes, and I would say, you know, another way to put it is that not growing up with bitterness or anger, and actually, I consider myself to be a very positive person in dealing with people or relationships, and I tend to see the positive or want to find the positive, even sometimes it may be difficult to find the positive, but I think growing up in New Milford and in this environment where there were a lot of people that cared and some people that had issues and, you know, the full gamut of personalities, kind of was very instrumental in allowing me to sort of learn how to navigate through challenging relationships.
Let me ask you if you were, and again, you haven't lived here, you've been back here often, or at least a fair amount of times, and you certainly know the inevitable growth of the community and how it's going to impact, you know, it's more tied to New York in ways because there's a lot of commuters here and everything, rather than when you were here, most of the people who lived here worked in New Milford or right around here. If you were friends with a young black family, how would you advise them on whether they should live in New Milford or look elsewhere?
Well, I certainly can't speak for New Milford today. I can speak for when I grew up in New Milford, and based on my experience in growing up in New Milford, in the neighborhood that I grew up in, we were, I think, the only black family. We were the only black family in that neighborhood. It was a biracial family, but it was a predominantly white neighborhood, and I would say the way we all got along, we had good neighbors, and people watched out for each other, and there wasn't any issues with you couldn't play with this person or that person. I would think ideally that's an ideal situation for any family, black or white, to raise children in.
Right.
And to the extent that those neighborhoods still exist, and to the extent that, you know, the schools are have the same fundamental foundations that they had when I was growing up here, it's certainly a place that I would encourage any family, black or white, to raise their kids in, because it's a small town, everybody knows each other, and I can truly say that people watched out for each other when I was growing up here, and I still have a very fond memory of New Milford, and I take every opportunity that I can to get to New Milford, because when I drive into New Milford, it's a very good feeling.
That's wonderful to hear. Do you have any other thoughts, any other perspectives you want to, something we didn't cover that you think might bring the focus of our, we're going to be doing the exhibit on the Black experience in New Milford, and you and Felicia are two of the people we're interviewing about for oral histories. We want to have people understand what it's been like for people who are black to live in New Milford, as you know, and also to share their thoughts on where New Milford might be going in the future, and we hope that we might be able to get a couple of young people in here to do this too. No offense to you, you're young compared to me.
I'll take it.
You're not a youth, and so we're hoping to get some young people. But I think we're hoping that we can have a broad spectrum of perspectives, and you've offered a wonderful picture of what New Milford was like for a black who had disadvantages moving to the States as a young boy, who grew up and basically found himself here, which...
Yeah, I think any time, any place reaches out to people to say you are welcome and we want you, it's always positive. And I think to the extent that New Milford is taken the time to reflect and say, you know, these are people that are important to the city, I think that will be appreciated and welcomed by other Black families that are looking for alternative places to live.
Well, we know if, when people are viewing this, whether on our website or here at the museum, getting to hear your perspectives will certainly be something they'll enjoy and feel good about their own town. So I thank you very much, Oz, for spending the time with us, for sharing your memories, and just for being who you are. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.